But it wasn't really something that I could do when I was a full-time librarian because it's just a lot more work. And so I was working 2 full-time jobs. And when I made that leap to retire from libraries and write full-time, I was like, okay, I'm going to do my historical. And my first historical was Because I Could Not Stop for Death, which was the Emily Dickinson mysteries. And the third one in that series, the second one's called I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died. So these are all first lines of Dickinson's poems. I mean, luckily she has a lot of poems with death in the title, so it makes my life easier as a history writer. And then the one coming out in February is called I Died for Beauty. So those were doing well. So my publisher's like, oh, maybe you're not too bad at this. And I was like, thank you. I did win an Agatha, but whatever. No, so why don't you write another historical mystery? And Emily Dickinson was someone that I had studied and loved since I was 15 years old. So they're like, who else do you got that you know a lot about? And I was like, I don't know. So I was like, I went and searched for someone to write about. I knew I wanted to write about a woman and make her a detective. I knew my time period. So my time period that I love the most is American history from the War of 1812 up to 1920. So like somewhere in that range is my kind of sweet spot of what I know the most about and that I enjoy learning more about. So I was like, well, let's find someone in Ohio because that's geographically convenient, right? So we've had a lot of President's Garfield. So I searched for presidents' wives, sisters, and things. And then I was like, I wonder if the Wright brothers had a sister. I knew they never got married. Sure enough, Catherine Wright was their younger sister. She was exactly 3 years younger than Orville. They had the same birthday. And what people don't know, for the most part, when we're learning about the Wrights in school and things, is she was really the silent third party in their success. If Catherine hadn't been there to help the boys, even though they were older than her, she always called them the boys in her letters. Because she, in a way, she became, when she was 15, she kind of became their mother in some ways. Their mother passes away when Catherine's 15, Orville's 18, and Wilbur's in his 20s. And they are the most eccentric, introverted engineers you've ever met in your life. And then here's Catherine, very personable, loves parties, super extroverted. So she was the opposite of them in temperament, and that's what they really needed for their success throughout their life. And I'll give specific examples. But the book that I wrote opens on December 17th, 1903, which is the first day the boys flew for the first time. They had been going to Kitty Hawk, and I do know it's Kildelma, but they refer to it as Kitty Hawk. So in my book, I refer to it Kitty Hawk. I have gotten the emails. So, but I'm writing from the point of view of the Wrights, and they just call the whole area Kitty Hawk and the Outer Banks. And we have to visualize the Outer Banks of what they were in 1900. 1901 is when they went first time, 1902, 1903. They're bug infested, wind blown, hardly any inhabitants. It's not a resort area. People don't go there for vacation to beach. There's no restaurants. There wasn't a lot of money there. And then in comes these 2 guys from Ohio, and they build essentially a little shelter on the beach for themselves and then a hangar for their flyer. And for 3 years, they come back trying to fly. In 1903, December 17th, they're successful. Now, as part of the release of this book, my publisher sent me on tour to like the southeast of the US, so from DC all the way to South Carolina. So I had several stops in North Carolina. So I had to be very careful when I was in North Carolina, not to be like, listen, they don't belong to you. They were only here like a few weeks for 3 years. They are ours. They are Ohioans. Once they flew, they never went back. It wasn't like they went and hung out in the Outer Banks. They didn't go back to North Carolina ever again. But I didn't say that when I was in North Carolina because, I was like, we also have license plates, you know, whatever. So, but that's true. They came back to Dayton a few days after they flew that first time, and everything else they did in Dayton. So they flew on Husband Prairie, which is now where the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is, and you can visit Huffman Prairie where they flew. They have a facsimile of that original hangar that the boys built there. I recommend you look on a map and find where the hangar is before you just randomly drive on the Air Force Base, because you will be met, knowing from personal experience, with someone with a lot of guns on. And they will escort you away from all the military places. And then I guess I was by myself when I went there to research. And I guess I didn't look too scary. So he was like, what are you looking for? And I was like, I'm looking for a Huffman Prairie. He's like, get back on the road. I go that, and he gave me directions. Because it is very confusing. Air Force Base is massive. And there's a lot of gates with lots of cannons. So about the Wright family. A lot of people don't know that the Wrights came from a very large family. Everybody thinks of Wilbur and Orville, like, and you know, that's it. But actually, it was a family of 7 children. There was a boy and a girl, infants that died. So those 2 siblings passed away before adulthood. And then there was their older brother, Rushlin, who moved to Kansas, tried his hand at cattle farming, tried his hand at regular crop farming, and he just struggled a lot. He got married, he had kids, and then there was their second brother, Loren. He stayed in Dayton, but he worked a lot of jobs. He also got married, had kids, struggled a lot financially. So here comes Wilbur and Orville, the 2 youngest boys. They see their older brothers that are struggling financially to support, you know, a wife and a family. And they're like, no, thank you. Because we want to invent things. They weren't just, until they got to the airplane, they were inventing all sorts of things. They were tinkers their whole lives. It was very common for when they were children to walk through the Wright's house, which was on 7 Hawthorne Street in Dayton, Ohio, and there would be pieces of a clock that the boys had taken apart, or pieces of a doorbell or anything that they would just tinker, because their mother was very much encouraged them to take things apart and learn how they worked. Their father was a bishop in the United Brethren in Christ Church First Constitution, Old Constitution. So it's a very long name because, you know, it's the end of the 19th century when like schisms are happening all over the place. So he was in the Old Constitution. So he's traveling around Indiana, Ohio, even to Illinois, church planting. So he wasn't really home a lot. He's on horseback spreading the word of God. So they were home with their mom a lot, and she encouraged them to tinker. And she was very handy. Everything in the house that needed fixed, they didn't go to dad, they went to mom and she would fix it. He was very cerebral, so they got that from their father, and their mother was handy. So when she died, when Catherine was just 15, the boys wanted to continue on in that they loved to build things and invent things and stuff. So originally they had a printing press, and they would tinker with the printing press and make that better. And then of course the bicycle shop, and they made the Van Cleef bicycle, which they named after their grandmother. So, and then when Orville was a senior in high school, he got injured really badly by another boy in high school, and I'll talk about that when I talk about the book too. So he didn't graduate from high school, and he was kind of bedridden for months. So while he was bedridden for months, he just got this interest in flight. And of course, this is the time when people are just jumping off of cliffs with wings on, see how it goes. And, or hot air balloons, dirigibles, those kind of things. And he's like, I feel like we can solve this. So at 18, he gets in his head, tells his brother, and they're like, this is what we're gonna do. And they did the printing press, and they did the bicycle shop, but ultimately this was their goal, to be the first in flight. So while they're in North Carolina, the boys were very much Midwestern Ohio boys. And because of that, people would come to them and they're like, hey, I hear you're working on the problem of flight. Would you like some money? They're like, no, thank you. Because they knew if they took money from someone else, they would have to take their opinion and potentially also give over any profits if they were successful. Very smart. But that meant the bicycle shop had to stay running and be profitable while they're gone for weeks at a time. And that's where Catherine comes in. So she went to Oberlin College, and in 1903, she is 29 years old. She's teaching full-time Latin at Steele High School in Dayton, Ohio. And she's also full-time running the bicycle shop for the boys when they're away, so that they were making money to support buying all the materials and things they needed for their flyer. Another thing about Catherine, the boys had made this pact that they would never get married because it's too expensive, and they felt like they had more better things to do. They had a mission, and they knew if they got married, they would have to like take care of people, and they're not interested in that. And they also kind of, not necessarily with her permission, folded Catherine into that pact as well. You two will never get married because you need to take care of us and take care of the house. And there's ways that Catherine kind of revolted around that, and I'll talk about the biggest way at the end. But so she very much wanted her own money. She wanted her own independence. So she wanted to be a teacher to have that. But she also had to take care of this pretty large house, their father, who's older, and then the two boys lived there. So out of her own money, she hired a maid, a 15-year-old girl, who took care of the house for her. And that way she could teach and ultimately help the boys by running the bicycle shop too. I don't know if they saw it that way, but like she only had so much time in a day to not, this is back. Their house in 1903 didn't have electricity yet. You're still running your clothes against a board. Everything's more labor intensive. Everything's washed by hand. So she really needed that help. So the boys chose North Carolina. A lot of people don't know, like, why go there? Like, why don't you just fly in Ohio? So they were very smart. And they wrote to, there was actually, the National Weather Service existed in 1901 when they went the first time. So they write the National Weather Service and they're like, hey, this is not their wording because they didn't say hey, but whatever. So they're like, hey, we want a place to test our flyer. We need a lot of wind and we need something really soft to land on when we crash. Because they knew it wasn't gonna like instantly be a success. And the National Weather Service told them the Outer Banks of North Carolina, very, very windy place if you've ever been there, and also you land on sand. So that's a little more comfortable than landing on dirt or grass or whatever. So that's how they ended up picking it. While they were away, like I said, Catherine ran the bicycle shop, but she also ran it with their engineer, or he worked there, Charlie Taylor, and she hated Charlie. So he's also in the book. And he was a gifted engineer. He could build anything. The Wrights would ask him, like, need a really light engine in order to stay aloft, that sort of thing. He was really gifted, but he swore like a sailor and smoked like a chimney and just drove her crazy. Because Catherine was a very proper lady, so she did not like that. And many times she tried to convince her brothers to fire him, and they never did. Much to her chagrin, that's for sure. So everything I've told you up to this point is true, and then I start making stuff up because that's my occupation. And so in my book, like I said, it starts on December 17th, 1903. And it starts with Catherine and her father receiving the telegram from the boys that they flew for the first time. And I have the exact wording of the telegram in front of me. It says, success 4 flights Thursday morning against 21-mile-per-hour wind. Start from level with engine power alone. Average speed through the air 31 miles, longest 57 seconds, informed press, home Christmas, Orville Wright. Now there's 2 mistakes in the telegram because the telegram was typed by a human, and even in history, mistakes are made when people record history, the people that were actually there. And the first mistake is their longest flight was 59 seconds. So give the boys those 2 extra seconds. They said 57, but like 59, we're almost at a minute. Let them have it. And the second mistake is the telegram operator misspelled Orville. So the operator spelled it Orevelle. Where's the I? No I. So I have to tell you, being, my publishers in New York, and many people read your book before it goes to publication. Every time I got edits back, and a young copy editor just out of Harvard, in her first job would send me, that note back, like, you misspelled Orville. I spelled it perfectly correct 1,000 other times in the novel, but like that one that always jumps out at me. It got to the point I finally had to set it, like, here is a facsimile of the telegram that the Library of Congress has. They have the original, and Orville's misspelled. So there is an author note in the back of the book saying, basically, I'm not an idiot. I know how to spell Orville. I just wanted to show you exactly what was written by the telegram operator who did not know how to spell Orville, and that's okay. It probably wasn't a very common name even back then. So I made Catherine a sleuth because she had the characteristics for it. Brilliant. She was gifted in languages. She taught Latin. She was also gifted in Greek. She didn't get to teach Greek in high school because she was a woman, and they thought that should be taught by an older male teacher. And I do discuss that in the book too. And she's also very nosy and bossy and all the good things that you need for a sleuth to think like, hey, I could solve this, and the cops are probably going to need my help, obviously. So the book is built around the boys' concern for their patent. So in 1903 March, they are pretty certain that they have the ticket, the idea that will solve the problem of, engine-powered flight. And that was wing warping, which is the ability to direct the plane through the air. So with their flyer, the wings, they would be able to bend them to the winds and things and stay aloft because of that, or turn and do all those things. Before that, no one had wing warping figured out. Now today they don't use wing warping, they have flaps on the wings and all kinds of stuff, but like the general idea came from the Wrights. And then after that, people were able to come up with different ideas how to fly. So they put in a patent for wing warping. Turns out they're right. In December they fly, but they applied for it in 1903. It is not approved until 1906. So those 3 years, the boys are really sweating it. They're afraid someone's going to figure it out. They're going to, and be copied and lose everything. So I figure, like, well, that's a great motive for murder. You solve the problem of human flight. So in the beginning of my book, Catherine invites her brothers. Because in 1900, the first PTA was started. So PTA started being in schools and things like that. So her school has a PTA in 1903 because she's one of the few female teachers in the school. The principal thinks, like, you should be the liaison to the PTA. So she has to go to this party for the president of the PTA, which is a Christmas party. And she wants her brothers to go with her. Wilbur's like, absolutely not. I don't really like people, which is true about the boys. Orville's like, I don't like people either, but I've missed you. He and Catherine were very, very close. They were best friends. So he's like, I'll go. But being a super introvert, and I could relate to this, he stuck some reading material into his coat because he wanted to find a little spot at the party he could hide away and read and not actually have to interact with any humans. It was like me when I was a child and we'd have to go to the family Christmas party and there was a bunch of people I was related to, but I only saw them one time a year. So I would take a book with me and I would find whoever, the family cat, and we would go under a table together and it was the best party ever. That's how I liked a Christmas party. So I totally related to Orville doing this. So of course, because I need the murder to happen, Orville sticks the plans for wing warping into the populace code. And as I mentioned before, when he was 18, he was injured by another student at school. It wasn't at school, but a student from his school, so badly that he did not graduate from high school. So I based this, my character, Herman Wheeler, on that real life person, but his name was not Herman Wheeler. So Herman Wheeler's there. Orville's very flustered to see him because, you know, he doesn't have the greatest memories. And Herman makes a big production of making fun and picking on Orville. Orville was bullied a lot when he was younger. You know, he was a nerd, you know, and, you know, speaking of for nerds everywhere, it happens. So he gets really embarrassed. He gets hot. He takes off his jacket. And then he flies from the room because he's so anxious. Sure enough, comes back, the jacket's gone. And then Catherine is there, and she is the one that solves all the problems for the Wright family. And he's like, you have to find a jacket. I have the plans for the flyer in it. You have to find it because that's what you do. You know, you help us. So she goes looking, and sure enough, Herman is dead on the billiards table, stabbed with a screwdriver. Dun dun dun. A screwdriver that happened to be in the jacket pocket of Orville's coat. So, but the plans are missing. So now we've got all kinds of problems. And I won't go into much more detail because I want you to read the book. So I can't tell you much more, but I do want to tell you a little bit more about the real Catherine Wright. So we're getting back to, you know, the non-murder part about Catherine Wright. Just to show you how important she was to the boys. 1908, by this time they have a practical airplane. Again, the practical airplane was invented in Dayton, Ohio, not North Carolina. Sorry, North Carolina. So it was invented in Huffman Prairie. And even though they had a patent, they had a plane that was flying loop-de-loops around the field all over the place. The US government wasn't sure about this whole airplane situation. Maybe it wasn't a good investment. So they went to Europe and they went to France to sell the airplane to, interestingly enough, this is 1908, they're selling it both to the French and the Germans in then 1914. Of course, we know what happens a few years later with World War I, where airplanes are used in war. So it's pretty crazy. It was that close together that they were practical airplanes and then actually, you know, shooting each other with airplanes. So it's pretty insane. And the boys were very much of the mindset, well, if the French and the Germans, and French at the time was very much like the language of Europe, so they could even speak to the Germans in French. So if they want to buy it, they should probably learn English because we're not gonna, you know, do that. Like, we have other things to do. We're not gonna learn the language. And Catherine was like, I don't think that's a great idea. So Catherine, in a short amount of time, taught herself French, and with her help, they were able to sell the airplane to Germany and France. So they needed her for that. She became very much their social secretary, managed their lives. In 1906, a little bit earlier, Orville was in the first plane crash ever. It was in the Washington, D.C. area when they were doing a demonstration on an army base. And he was terribly injured again. She left her teaching job, went to DC and nursed him back to health. It was also the first plane crash that someone died in. The army officer that was in the plane with him passed away. So that was the first death by plane crash in 1906. So we look back on Catherine, and this whole time she has kind of stayed with her brothers on their pact, like we're never getting married because we've got better things to do. And in 1912, sadly, Wilbur passes away from typhoid, from bad water. And I think one of the reasons he passed away because once their patent was approved, immediately people were figuring out what they were doing because they were out in the open about wing warping, and people were copying them. So they filed, dozens of lawsuits across the country for patent infringement. And they actually opened an office in New York City, and Wilbur was traveling there so much, like doing all the paperwork and everything. And they won every case because they had that patent. However, it really wore Wilbur down. So when he got typhoid, he really didn't have the energy to fight it, and he died at age 45. So when he passes away, Orville isn't really the businessman of the two, so he sells the company. And the Wright company joins the Curtis company, and I can go into that whole thing of how they merge, and Curtis actually was one of the people that tried to steal their wing warping. It's very complicated. But the Wright Curtis company goes on, but Orville's not involved with it anymore. He buys the island in Canada, they vacation there, he's very happy. He very much doesn't want Catherine ever to move on, because she's taking care of him until their father dies in 1915. She takes care of their father, all those things. But, Catherine never verbally agreed to that idea. So when she was at Oberlin, she had a very good friend named Harry Haskell, and Harry would tutor her in math. Math wasn't her strong suit. But Harry was betrothed to a young woman named Isabella from his hometown of Lorain, Ohio. So he was a year or two older than her. He graduated. He and Isabella got married. They moved to Kansas City, where Harry became a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist for the Kansas City Star, and eventually the Pulitzer Prize editor for the Kansas City Star. So super successful. So years and years later, in the 1920s, a little bit before that, Isabella passes away suddenly in her 40s. And years later, in the 1920s, Harry is elected to the alumni board of Oberlin College. In the same year, Catherine's elected to the alumni board of Oberlin College. So they reconnect and they fall in love. So he asks her to marry him. She's 51 years old. So her love story starts at 51. She's 51 years old. She falls in love with him. He asks her to marry him. She says yes. Now she's got to tell Orville. What she wants to do is have her wedding at Hawthorne Hill, the big mansion that is still in Dayton. Today you can tour it. It's beautiful. I highly recommend it. It's part of Caroline Park, which is their historical park there. Kind of like Hale Farm, but 50 years later. So it's more like turn of the century, not like the Civil War era. And so she tells Orville, I want to get married at Hawthorne Hill. We have your blessing. And he says, absolutely not. And this is 1926, and they end up getting married at Oberlin instead, and he does not speak to her again. So yes, he was very upset. I know. I always feel bad when I ended on this tragic story, but it doesn't necessarily get better. So sorry. That's the problem when you write about real people, because you're stuck with the real facts of the tragedies in their life. So 1929, they've been married 3 years, very happy. They didn't go on a honeymoon initially, and they're planning a huge honeymoon to do a tour of Europe like you would have back then. And she gets pneumonia, and it's very severe, and she's dying. So her husband writes to Orville, informs him, your sister's dying, please come see her. He says no. Lauren is the only still living brother of the original family. Lauren goes to Orville and you have to go. So he convinces Orville to go to Kansas City to say goodbye to his sister. He does make it there in time. Her husband asks her do you know who this is? Because by this time she's very much at the end of her life. And she's like, of course I do. And she passes away. So I know, sorry. But again, like I said, that's the constraints of writing about real people. Because, you know, I really have to stick to those big moments in their, obviously in their life or in the end of their life, who they marry, when they pass away, these different features that happen. When I wrote about Emily Dickinson, you know, I had the same problem. She's dying young too, like, so, and she had you know, tragedies throughout her life that, you know, shaped her, and, you know, it's both a challenge and it's also an honor to share these people with others that might not know about they might know their work, in the case of Emily Dickinson, might know of their family, in the case of the Wright brothers, but they don't necessarily know the person they were. So that's what, you know, and also in my case, they solved murders. So that's a little extra thing in there. But between 1903, when that first flight happened, and 1929, so when she passes away, she had an unbelievably full life, one that I think any of us would envy. Traveled around Europe. She was very much in the late, like 1915, 1916, she became a leader in the suffragette movement in Ohio, so I can't wait to get to that part. So much so that she organized a march, and she convinced her father. By this time Wilbur had passed, but Orville was in the march, and it got national news because that, by this time, the Wright brothers were super famous. So he was in the march, and it brought attention to women's suffrage. And then the second book in the series that comes out in the summer is set in 1904. And what I love about it, it just shows Catherine's spunk. So 1904 is the World's Fair in St. Louis for the Louisiana Purchase expedition. And she really wanted to go, and no one wanted to go with her. So she hopped on a train and went by herself. This is a true fact about her. So I figured, let's kill someone there. And so that she could solve a murder there. So she meets up with one of her girlfriends, another graduate of Oberlin, and in real life, they went around and enjoyed the fair. And in my case, they're also solving a murder. So I'm looking forward to that coming out, and it's called Not They Who Soar, which is the first line of a Paul Laurence Dunbar poem. So Paul Laurence Dunbar was the first really successful African-American poet after the Civil War, and during and after Restoration. And he was a childhood friend of Orville Wright. So if you go to Dayton, you go to the Wright Dunbar National Historic Park. And I really wanted to include Dunbar in one of the books because he was close to the family. So much so when the boys had a printing press, they printed his black newspaper for him through their printing press. So they were very supportive of him, very close to him. He and Orville went to high school together. And I wanted to include him in the book. So I had to put him in this book because, again, I'm constrained by death dates, and he dies 3 years later. So I have him in the book, and that's how I came up with that title. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about this book or any of the others, but I hope you enjoy it. And also it's available at every library. I have a couple copies with me, but it's definitely many, many copies in the Ohio library systems. Thank you. Yes.
You think you could bring Hiram College into one of your books?
Sorry?
Do you think you could bring Hiram College into one of your books?
It's, you know, it's always possible, because I do love writing about, I mean, Garfield fits in my era, for sure. And I love writing about real people and making them crime solvers. So it's always possible. And I love writing about Ohio. Most of my books are set in Ohio, so you never know. Garfield might show up in one of them for sure. Yes.
What authors do you like to read? History of authors.
I really like Charles Todd. I don't know if he writes like World War II, World War One. He's also one of the nicest guys ever. When I won the Agatha, like he had endorsed my first historical mystery very kindly through my publisher. And then when I won the Agatha, like the award ceremony is still going on and people are being announced and stuff, and he like crawls through the banquet hall to come over and congratulate me. And it was just like one of the sweetest memories because I hold him in such high regard for one of my idols to be like doing that. And then I also like Anna Lee Huber. She writes 1830s England, and then also World War One. And then I read a lot of cozy authors too. Kylie Logan, Vivian Chen are two that are here in Ohio. Both are really fun and hilarious. Both write books set in like the Cleveland area, so it's kind of fun to read places that you know. But I'm very much like, I either am reading like history books like Dave McCullen or a mystery. So I'm very like narrow in my reading, I guess. So that was one thing when I left the library, I'm like, oh, I don't have to read this literary fiction I don't really like anymore. I can read what I want. I don't have to know what's hot anymore in libraries. So any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, but you do your own research. You don't have a researcher yet.
I do it all. And that's very much, I mean, I couldn't have had a better like first career to learn how to research. And I have a lot of experience like working in archives and things like that. So I always, for the most part, know where to look, or more importantly, being a librarian, know who to ask. So with the second Wright brothers book that's coming out, I had found in like a newspaper a little tiny mention of this guy that got arrested for like a small crime, but it didn't say his name. It was just like, so I couldn't find it anywhere. And I wrote the Historical Society of, St. Louis, and a few weeks later, they're like, here it is, and here's like 900 other things with his name on it. And like, it was like, information overload, and it's all like scanned, and they, all for free. It was just, just to know. I think people don't take advantage, and that's why it was so lovely to hear how much your archives are being used, because like people don't take advantage of like, we have these amazing like silos of these information in colleges, in historical societies, libraries, that you can find the most wonderful things, little teeny detail like that I needed for the book, and I could have left it out, but I was like, well, if I can find his real name, I want to use his real name instead of calling him Bob, So that, the case of Herman Wheeler, since I killed him, I changed the name. But this guy, I didn't want to like give the wrong impression. But like this guy lives on in life, so I let him live, so he got his real name. Any other questions? Yes.
Curious, who are some of the women that you decided not to write about for your next series?
So the other big contender for me was Edison's wife. And I decided not to write about her because in some ways she was too similar to Emily Dickinson, upper class woman, and had money and things like that. And the Wrights really didn't have money. They were like at the beginning, they were completely self-made. So they're the start of the middle class. Middle class kind of starts at the turn of the 20th century. And I really wanted to like delve into that because most of us are in the middle class, now. And I think if I lived back then, my family would either be, we definitely wouldn't be upper class like the Dickinsons were. We would either be, a lot of my family came from West Virginia to work at Goodyear kind of thing. So we would be lower class or on the cusp of the middle class. So I wanted to kind of delve into that. So that's why I didn't end up doing her, because I didn't want to do something that was too similar to Emily. I wanted someone to say like, and I really like attached onto the idea that they wouldn't take money from other people, because that just seemed like such an Ohio decision, or, you know, like such, you know, like, that just seems like such something like an Ohio would do, like, no, you're not gonna tell me how to do this, I'm not just gonna take a check, I'll figure out how to build it myself. So I really like that, being an Ohioan myself. It's a great question. Yes.
So, non-Ohio settings of the book of yours that I was looking at most recently was, I think, Mums and Mayhem.
Yes,
So it's set in Scotland, I think?
it's set in
Did you get to-
Scotland.
Did you get to travel to Scotland?
I did, and I wrote it off on my taxes. It was great. Yeah, I went to Scotland. That's a really, I wrote a series called The Magical Bookshop Mysteries. It's probably one of my best-selling series, and so they wanted me to write another like light paranormal mystery. So I was like, I wanted to write something about the Lake District in England because I knew it very well. I'd been there many times. And when I was, you know, sent this to my agent, she's like, I think it's a great idea, put it in Scotland, because it was like the height of Outlander. She's like, it'll sell if it's in Scotland. So I was like, sure. But I didn't have the frame of reference for Scotland. So shoot, I had to go for a week and research in Scotland, because I didn't, you know, for me, it's really important to put my feet on the ground and smell, even though we're like, in the case of historical, you know, 100+ years away from when things are happening. Like still, like when I went to Dayton, you know, Hawthorne Street's still there, the street they lived on. I can walk on their street, looks very different, but it's still there. And I could see like, hey, Hawthorne Street's here, her school was here, how long does it take me? Now she's gonna walk or ride a bicycle, but I went by car because I didn't want to get killed. But, you know, but like, so like, how long does that take from get A to B? So like, those things are really important to me. So I really wanted to go to Scotland because like, it was a garden mystery series. So I needed to know, I had to go, I went in May when the book is set. So like, what's the flora and fauna? What does it smell like? You know, all those kind of things are really important to me. So I had a valid reason. Please, IRS, do not come after me. But yeah, it's a great question. Well, I'm so happy that you invited me here. It was quite an honor to speak to all of you today. And I do have some books for sale over there, but like I said, they're also all available at the library as well. So thank you.
So yeah, I guess our meeting for this thing is to hang out and chat with each other, but it's officially the end of the
Thank you.
Yes, we can do that, right? It is.
Yeah, that's good. I don't know. We didn't plan the ending. We had everything else planned, but yeah. Okay, that's all.
Yeah. Of course. Oh, that's totally fine. Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I've been there a lot. I love Traverse. Do you want me to sign it to you?
Hey, lady. Hey, what were those? Was it you or was it Ella? The food book, that had food in the title. It was Ella.
Yep.
I was thinking it was you. I don't know why.